Alright guys, I'm Andrew. So freshman year I was like, alright, what am I gonna do? So I joined LD, I did that for like 3 weeks, and then there was the first conference coming up and I realized I knew absolutely nothing. So I dropped out of that conference, dropped out of LD entirely and did absolutely nothing freshman year. Sophomore year I sat around and did absolutely nothing. And then junior year came around and I'm like, crap, I have to apply to college next year and I have no extracurriculars. And I'm like, alright, what am I gonna do? So I thought back, and like in junior high school, I went to like a really crappy junior high, and like the teachers were terrible, and I'd argue with them all the time. So I'm like, alright, I should do something like debate. So I'm like, alright, let me try JSA. And I went to the first JSA event, and it really sucked. And it was really illegit. So I'm like, I'm probably not gonna do JSA again. So I'm like, what else can I do? I'm like, alright, I tried speech and debate, and I tried JSA. So I guess Molly UN's the only thing left. So
wow,
actually,
that's nice how you see us like that.
Well,
These videos make us look so good.
So I went to Molly UN and I was really intimidated at first because everyone was pretty tight-knit and knew a lot, and I thought Isabel was like the smartest person ever when I joined. And so I went to home for the first time junior year, and it was pretty illegit, and Jeremy was in my committee, and I think it was on, I can't remember what it was on, but I remember I was writing a resolution with him, and then suddenly China was in our committee, and she realized Jeremy was like really good. So she started flirting with everyone, and she kind of like kicked Jeremy out of the group. So Jeremy, and Ariel, and the two of them were like running around trying to get people onto a new resolution, which I decided not to join, which was a mistake, because then China kicked me off later, and so I tried a new one. And it was the one where we were doing the double delegate, so my partner crossed out our country name and wrote Uzbekistan on the back of it. And so during the lunch, I think it was Iran came up to us and was like, hey, you guys seem pretty chill, you want to go in the back and drink? So I'm like, oh, they were drinking. Yeah, we did.
Hold on. I have to have a moment. I told you so.
So I'm like, I guess this is what happens when you put 150 people in a room together. And I was like really awkwardly like, no, that's okay, I don't drink. I had to like tell my partner not to go back there with him. And so we went back to committee and I kind of sucked and then didn't do much the rest of junior year. And so senior year I'm like, alright, I really gotta get involved in Molly UN. So I went back to Home again, and I was in a crisis committee for the League of Nations right before World War II starts. And I'm like, God, this is gonna suck. The League of Nations is probably the only body less effective than the UN. And I'm like, we're gonna be spending like 5 hours arguing appeasement, and it's gonna be so boring. So 5 minutes in, with like everyone prepared to talk about appeasement, the Prime Minister of Britain gets assassinated, Germany starts invading people, and like World War II just started, and we're the League of Nations. So we're like, crap, what are we gonna do? So like during this time, technically Spain was in the middle of a civil war and the fascists were winning. But I kind of decided I didn't want to do that because the Allies seemed so much more powerful. So I'm like, I kind of just like gave a speech saying we put down the fascist revolt and we're going to join with the Allies, and my chair was cool with that. So Germany unfortunately wasn't in our committee, but they were invading everyone. And so Romania was kind of the proxy Germany. It was coming up, giving speeches about racial superiority, even though they weren't racially superior. And just like trying to convince you to work with them, which we didn't. So I was working with all the Allied powers, and then France decides, because France was in the middle of getting invaded, why don't we tactically retreat into Spain, and we'll pull our government into Britain. But that kind of didn't work that way with the chair, and so what wound up happening was France just surrendered, their armies got conquered because they're France. So then Germany and every other Axis power moves down to Spain, who is me, and literally the entire committee was just my country getting invaded left and right, but we wouldn't surrender. And like Spain had this unbelievably powerful army somehow, even though we just got through fighting a civil war. And it was really fun. The British Prime Minister got assassinated like 5 times. Gandhi came around in India and decided that he wanted Indian independence in the middle of World War II, so we gave that to him. Spain also developed a navy, so we were fighting the Japanese in the Pacific for a while. I don't know if that happened. We later found out after committee was over and after the British Parliament got bombed, that it was India who kept bombing the Parliament and killing our prime ministers. But India was being run by Gandhi, so I don't really know what he was doing, but he got a little violent in committee and we had no idea what was going on. The United States decided to develop nuclear technology in Cuba. Then Cuba had a communist rebellion. They went between being allies and enemies of the United States like 10 different times. But in the end, Cuba decided to take the nuclear technology of the United States, which they built in Cuba, and give it to the Russians. The Russians then decided they wanted to ally with the Germans and nuked America. By the end of committee, everyone got nuked. We legalized marijuana so everyone could deal with the end of nuclear war. And we built a spaceship to preserve mankind by our chairs so they got blown up. I half blame our chairs for letting this descend into like stupidness because we started off pretty serious. But that was a very fun committee. And definitely a lot of memorable experiences there. I still can't figure out how Gandhi decided to start bombing people or how Spain got this massive army, but that happened. And then Walmart was really great because I got into GW at that time and it was being held at GW. And like, before this, I hadn't gotten to any colleges. The only brother I heard from was Georgetown saying they weren't going to take me, so I was like freaking out I wasn't going to get into college. And so then I kind of felt like really good about it, but then I went back to committee and told people I got into GW and they kind of like gave me like dirty looks and weren't working with me after that. But yeah, because a couple of them applied to GW and apparently didn't get in. I didn't know it at the time. And I didn't even tell them. I was talking to my chairs about going to GW and they just overheard it and got pissed about it. But that was a really fun committee. It was on migration into the EU, which I thought was just going to be the most boring thing ever. And it was really fun. Our chair decided for our second topic she would only allow 2 resolutions. So there was a huge amount of like fighting, and we can only have 4 sponsors per resolution. So there was a huge amount of fighting between one another. I just like at the first 5 minutes wrote half the resolution and was like, hey guys, you can figure out who the other 3 sponsors are, but I'm going to be one of them because I wrote half this. So that worked out well. Then after we had the 2 resolutions, our chair screwed us over even more and said she'd only take one of them, so we had to merge the 2 resolutions with only 4 sponsors. And so we had a 10-minute unmod, which got extended for another 10 minutes, which got extended for another 20 minutes. And for 40 minutes straight, we were shouting at each other about who was going to be the 4 sponsors, what we were going to include in it. It was fun because I can be very loud without actually getting to the point of shouting. And so people kind of thought I was like the one reasonable person, even though I was being louder than everyone else. And our chair like kept coming over and was noticing how loud I was being and thought that was a good thing for some reason. And then we decided we were going to commit a subcommittee to deal with the problem. And one of the 8 sponsors couldn't get their mind around the fact that a legislative body would create a subcommittee. And they like spent like 15 minutes arguing, why are you just passing it off to someone else? This is not the way to go about it. Making a subcommittee is just like saying you don't want to deal with the problem. And we were like trying to explain to him this is how bodies work and he couldn't get his mind around that. So we dropped him as a sponsor. In the end, I managed to be one of the 4 sponsors. It was fun. There was this girl who was from the Conservative Party. Oh, there was another guy from the Conservative Party who was talking in like an accent and talking about how immigrants were unchristian, how we couldn't let Turkey in. He was probably like one of the funniest guys there. It was really fun. Somehow we got socialists and conservatives to work together with only one resolution. That was a great experience. And like, I guess on a more serious note, like I learned so much from being in Malu and I really regret that I didn't get more involved. But like, junior year, when I knew absolutely nothing about politics whatsoever, I kind of took a lesson from AJ, which was that you don't have to know what you're talking about, but if you speak loud enough, people assume you know what you're talking about.
So true, guys.
And like literally the entire part of junior year was just me shouting for speeches and it would work even though I knew nothing at all. Like senior year I actually started reading the newspaper and learning stuff, and junior year it was just literally shouting and people assuming I knew what I was talking about. I remember doing speech drills as a junior, and like I remember thinking they were pretty stupid at the time, but like looking back, they were like honestly like one of the most useful things ever. That and the body language classes. Like people would come up to me for help and I'd literally teach them what you taught me, and it was great. And so I guess that's it. Thank you so much for all you guys gave to me.